Good morning. Welcome to the November 28th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. I'm Blanny Miller, Chair of the Commission. We start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on an item not on the agenda today? Seeing none, we will move to committee reports. We have one item coming from the Strategic Planning Committee. Committee Chairman is not in attendance, but I believe Commissioner Bennett is graciously willing to give that report.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Good morning. The Strategic Planning Committee met on November 9th to discuss the affordable housing policy, location policy. Thank you. We had presentations from staff and also from housing and neighborhoods, and we had a really good discussion. I believe the action that was taken was to continue the discussion at a future meeting and have someone from transportation there, because we wanted to understand more about how transit route decisions are made with respect to the affordable housing location policy, and if there is any correlation between the two. So I don't know that the meeting date was set, but the direction was to have staff come back to talk to us about the relationship between transit routes and affordable housing.
The regularly scheduled meeting date for that committee is January 11. That's the second Thursday. And I think we've been, unless you all advise me otherwise.
I think we have reconstituted the committees.
You have not.
We have not.
Yet. Right, that'll be on your next agenda.
On our next agenda.
Right. You've said what you want to do, but.
Yeah, and you jog the roster around.
Yeah, so we're going to bring a bylaws document for you to review at the next meeting.
Okay. I thought in the short run we were just going to move agenda items around. Okay.
Yeah, we've done the short run.
I was going to, so could we move this item to the infrastructure and,
Well, didn't know if during today's meeting y'all wanted to discuss what that other committee was going to be called.
that's right.
That would be
Yeah.
direction for us in preparing the draft. And so if, for example, even after discussion, you decided to go with you just switch you change the roster today for the next meeting, we'd still do the rules of procedure change on the 12th. We can informally set it up however you guys want to do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Great answer. Can you just remind me who the chair of the third committee will be?
The second,
The committee of the whole is chaired by Mr. Raines. Text exchange is chaired by Ms. Fox. The third committee, the one, I think
believe
of this
it's
as the
Chair Bennett.
committee of the other.
yes, committee of the half.
Committee of the half.
Yes.
Who is, have we decided on a chair for that committee yet?
I believe it was Chair Bennett, but I need to perhaps discuss that directly with her if she would like that position.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, being voluntold.
That's helpful, thank you. And so we'll bring that back. David and I have been doing some work on that, and we will have a markup for you so that you can take action on that at your next meeting.
I see. I was wondering in the short run, should we go ahead and move agenda items out of strategic planning into the infrastructure and
I
mobility?
think you should wait and do that at the
I see.
next meeting. Yeah, because that will give you all some time to think about the committee of the half. If that committee of the half would like to use the strategic planning time slot or the infrastructure and mobility time slot.
Great.
Like what's good for members.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. So that will be at our December 12th meeting. And perhaps we could talk offline as well about some ideas and goals related to that. So thank you for that committee report. Moving on to new business. These requests have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, so we will hear a full staff presentation and applicant presentation, and we will hear from the public. The first item, D1, is rezoning case Z3623 at 1230 and 1234 South Saunders Street. This case is to rezone approximately 2.01 acres from industrial mixed use, 3 stories, to commercial mixed use, 20 stories, conditional use. And I will turn to Matthew Burns for a presentation from city planning staff.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is request Z3623, as you mentioned, and your deadline for action is January 27th, 2024. Nearby zoning districts to Z2623 are predominantly, well, a mix of residential and mixed use, including R6 and R10, as well as commercial mixed use, neighborhood mixed use, and industrial mixed use. The nearest compatible zoning district is to the south and west, which is CX20 ULCU, which was part of a case approved in May of this year, that dated back to 2021, which was a 30-acre assemblage that fronted partly on South Saunders Street, but also on Lake Wheeler over to the west. Here is an aerial view of the site. You can see that it is within either the Fuller Heights or Raleigh neighborhoods. It's fairly close to the State Farmers Market, as well as Mount Hope Cemetery and Dorothea Dix Park. And a closer aerial view, I pointed out just some businesses that are in the area, which include the Perk Up Cafe to the east, Arps Seafood to the south, and several garages close by on South Saunders Street. Here are a couple views of the site. On the lower right, which is on Fuller Street, it's kind of hard to see because some of that is existing right-of-way, but that would be the rear of the site. There are 2 proposed conditions as part of this request. Condition number 1 prohibits the cemetery use, and condition number 2 limits total AM and PM peak hour trips. So when comparing the existing and proposed zoning, the request would increase entitlement and have slightly different setbacks depending on what kind of building is built. Compared to the city average, the site has a higher walk score, higher transit score, higher bike score, and lower transportation costs, as well as very high access to jobs. And the site is very close to Go Raleigh Route 7, the South Saunders route, and there's a bus stop at the intersection of Prospect Avenue and South Saunders Street within walking distance. As far as future transit service, the site is within 1/2 mile of the Western BRT line and 3/4 mile of the Southern BRT line. As far as affordability, the request would add to the housing supply, does not include subsidized units, would permit a variety of housing types, including smaller units, and is within walking distance of transit. As far as demographics, area residents are more likely to be racial minorities compared to the city average, and more likely to be low income. And ACS data is incomplete for this request, but the cost of rent decreased by 1% between 2020 and 2021. This site is within 2 area plans. The Southern Gateway, which identifies the area it's in as Old Saunders, as well as the Dix Edge study, which was adopted earlier this year. And the request is consistent with the future land use designation of regional mixed use. And the request is inconsistent with the urban form map, mainly because it does not feature frontage. So overall, it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and consistent with the future land use map and inconsistent with the urban form map. Consistent policies are, in general, related to reducing typical car-based trips and locating development near proposed and existing transit. as well as this, a big one is DE1, which calls for expanding housing opportunities at all income levels, and that's part of the Dix Edge plan. Inconsistent policies are largely related to frontage, and that is partially because both of the area plans call for having a frontage on new development in the area. And finally, the Dix Edge plan also calls for any new development to have green stormwater infrastructure. Your deadline for action is January 27th, 2024, and there are no outstanding issues. Let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. We will now turn to public comment for those in support. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak. When you come to the podium, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the Planning Commission. Samuel Morris with Longleaf Law Partners, 4509 Creedmoor Road, Suite 302, here on behalf of the property owners, Williams Family Properties, LLC. And Matthew did a great job of explaining the basics of the request. We are seeking to rezone this assemblage that's just over 2 acres from its current IX3 zoning designation to CX20. It's located in a regional mixed-use area as designated on the future land use map, as well as frequent transit and mixed-use center on the urban form map. And overall has been deemed consistent with the future land use map and comprehensive plan. So here is another look at the subject property, as you just heard, located along South Saunders. It's these 2 parcels that total just over 2 acres. They are owned by the Williams family and have been since the early 90s. So there are just no immediate plans to redevelop this property. It's not under contract for redevelopment. The Williams family has, like we said, owned this for several decades and just seen the growth going on in this area and the city as a whole, and also seen several changes to the city's adopted policies and several rezonings in the area and directly adjacent to them, 2 commercial zonings of 12 and 20 stories. And so in order to kind of, inconsistent with those kind of adopted plans, and in order to create more versatile development options in the future, are seeking to rezone to the CX20 designation. Like we said, consistent with several rezonings in the area. And here's that wider aerial just to show proximity to Dix Park. And as you move north on South Saunders, as well as Dawson and McDowell, into the southern portion of downtown. Current zoning is that industrial mixed use, 3 stories, which, as I'm sure you're aware, allows a very broad range of rather high intensity industrial uses. It also has restrictions on residential. You're not allowed to have residential on the first floor, and it allows buildings up to 50 feet. So it does have a broad range of options, but not exactly consistent with that regional mixed use future land use designation and the kind of growing trend towards commercial mixed use in this area. So, one of the many reasons we think that the CX designation is more consistent than its current. And then here's a wider zoning map too. Wanted to show you all these nearby rezonings that have been approved, particularly kind of 3 of note. Here you have, well, that's not a good color, but right here, the PD, you have the Park City South planned development that was rezoned a couple years ago. That's a Kane project. It's currently under ASR, has a 20-story tower. Then you also have this project right here. That's the Weld, which is already got buildings going up. two 20-story towers there. And then down on the bottom left of the screen is the most recently approved, the Baker roofing case was rezoned. 30 acres were rezoned to CX20, and that was just approved this year, as Matthew mentioned. And as you move kind of north this way, just north of the screen, there is at the very southern edge of downtown, there is a DX40 zoned property. So several properties in the near area with heights of 12, 20, 40 stories. And there's that future land use designation that we talked about, clearly indicating a transition of this area from its current lower moderate scale residential to higher density commercial mixed use of greater heights, as indicated through this adopted map. And finally, the urban form map, as we mentioned, it has two designations, both frequent transit area and mixed use center. That's because of course, the property's proximity to downtown, extremely well served by existing transit as well as future transit coming online with the BRT routes. So a lot of investment in the transit infrastructure around here, giving it that kind of rich urban context. And that's also related to the Dick's Edge area plan that Matthew showed you as well. Here's another image of that with the property having the red star on it. Really the key impact of this map on our property, as you can see, are the two street extensions, essentially completing the grid around our specific property, as you can see there. And that is essentially connecting Mercury up to Prospect, moving west to east, and then connecting Fuller down from north to south. And so those will, as you can imagine, those will substantially enhance the circulation in that particular corner where South Saunders hits Prospect Avenue, and really complete that grid, both from a vehicular but as also a pedestrian standpoint, to make it much easier to move around to get from the other side of South Saunders over to the Dix Park area. And so with that, did want to address the main inconsistency with this case and just kind of pull up this aerial to use it to talk off of related to urban form and like frontage. So the reason we have not included a frontage in this is because of the difficulties associated with a three-sided build to and the Fuller Street and Prospect Avenue extensions. So as once these streets are completed, we'll have frontage. And here, let me back up for a moment and just point one thing out. This property is already zoned 20 stories. That one little missing piece, that was part of the Baker roofing case. So that's already zoned CX20. So just putting that in context. But so, if and when developed, this property will have 3 right-of-way frontages. And by placing a frontage, like an urban limited frontage or something like that, of course you have a build to along all of your rights of way. And so that would require the building to be pushed all the way, pushed up against the road on all 3 sides. And basically the size of this lot, as I understand it, it's not really suitable for multiple buildings. It's going to be a one building type situation if and when it's developed, but it's also of a size where it's not likely to be completely, setback to setback, like a full build out, like a full city block or something like that. So what you end up with is it would be kind of a difficult to, you'd have almost like, you'd really just have to kind of find a way to push the building up against those and likely have empty space in the middle. And so from a kind of urban form and the intent of really, when you look at it here, it's likely that the goal is really, to push that building up against South Saunders and maybe also Prospect Avenue to the south, perhaps, but maybe not necessarily to push the building up against Fuller Street. And so, from just kind of envisioning future development, that seems very difficult. And we also just like a conversation about the character of Fuller Street is worth having too, given the fact that this residential development has a 15-foot kind of protected area, and there's no access whatsoever as platted kind of from that neighborhood. So there's really no relationship of that neighborhood to Fuller Street. It's going to kind of remain vegetated on that one side. And so when you think about build twos and the kind of main street environment, that is the intent of those kind of frontage. We're not sure if that's necessarily the intent along Fuller Street. There's also some significant stand of trees back there, and if you put in an urban frontage, that of course eliminates any kind of tree save that would occur on that back side. So in our mind, this is probably more suited for a hybrid frontage type situation. I'm happy to kind of work with you all, but in our mind, it would be, placing a build to along South Saunders, ensuring, pedestrian connectivity to all those rights of way, and certainly prohibiting parking between the building and the street. All of those kind of key aspects of having a frontage, we do think can be accomplished on this site, but just the kind of blanket frontage would likely create, particularly with the build to, would create substantial challenges on this site. So that's kind of where we're coming from, and wanted to kind of explain that situation and hear your feedback regarding urban form. Otherwise, really appreciate your time and happy to take any questions or feedback that you all have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public here who would like to speak in favor of this project? Seeing none, we will move on to those opposed. Anyone opposed to this case will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And seeing none, we'll bring it back to the table. Questions and comments follow up from our commissioners. Yes, Commissioner Fox.
Question for the applicant. I appreciate the explanation of why frontage wasn't included. I would be interested in seeing some sort of conditions related to a frontage for South Saunders and for Prospect, as you mentioned. I'm also wondering that the other inconsistency I'd note is related to green stormwater and LID. Perhaps that some sort of treatment, I don't know what the grades are right there, but some sort of green stormwater treatment might be appropriate on the Fuller Street side. I don't know if you have any comment related to that.
Yeah, I think we're definitely happy to look into that. Again, the green stormwater infrastructure comment that kind of came in with the staff report end of last week, so we haven't taken a super close look at the stormwater situation on the site. But with that comment coming in the staff report, and absolutely happy to look into what could be accomplished from a green stormwater perspective.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Miller.
So I have two things. First is actually just a question for staff about the land use. It says in the report that it is regional mixed use, and just so I get this right, is it also saying that it is considered core transit by regional mixed use? 'Cause I was reading that, I was just trying to figure that out since it backs up to that whole R6 area around Talmadge there, or Talmadge, however you say it. It seemed to me like that would be an edge area, given that it's within 150 feet of low to moderate density zone for 3-story. So I was just curious how that is designated as core transit as opposed to edge.
I did not print the height table, but from what I recall, since it isn't a frequent transit, area, recommended heights would be as tall between 12 and up to 20 stories as far as the maximum.
Yeah, and I do see that in our comp plan. It designates that for regional mixed use if it's emergent urban center, core transit, it says minimum of 2, maximum of 20. But then for edge area, it says maximum of 4 for regional mixed use. And that would seem like an edge area to me, given that it backs up directly to all that R6. And then I believe what's to the south is 3-story mixed use too. Maybe not to the south, I'm unsure of that one, but definitely to the back is directly is R6. anyways, it's just something I'm curious about because obviously the heights in our comp plan for regional mixed use vary pretty widely, right, from 2 to 20 stories for regional mixed use.
Any other follow-up from that? None? Okay. Other questions and comments from the commissioners?
Well, can I
Yeah,
do part
please.
two?
Go.
And then the other thing is, this is more for the applicant. I think, this is, regardless of my first question, this is in a FTA, frequent transit area, and it's zoned IX3. So I think we talked about this last meeting with regard to that Shaw Drive case, but this would qualify for the frequent transit development option under its current designation, which would allow people to build 5 stories if they did our density bonus, 20% of units, a 60% AMI for 30 years in the additional stories. Being that that's already available here, I would like to see that in any additional stories above 3. If all the other plots on here that are 3-story mixed use are also adhering to that, and that's something that we are trying to do in our comp plan with a frequent transit development option, I would think we would try to do it here as well. And if we were increasing entitlement at 20 stories, I think it would be appropriate to see that designation 20% and the additional stories up to 20. If we were going to move forward here, I would like to see that as a condition, personally. And yeah.
Other comments from the commissioners? Yes.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I have a few comments. I was concerned about the frontage as well, and I would like to definitely see some sort of conditions that mimic the frontage as much as the applicant would think is possible. And frankly, I'm a little bit concerned about what Fuller Avenue would look like if there was no frontage required along here, especially since there's no access on the west side of the street. If we got parking deck use along the west side of the parcel, that could create a little, like a dead alley right there. So if we had some sort of plans or some sort of use in mind that we could judge what was going to go in, it makes me kind of uncomfortable to grant that when we don't know what kind of development would come. Excuse me. I did have a question for planning staff. I was interested in the frequent transit option as well. Like, how would that apply to a case like this sort of rezoning? It seemed that those benefits max out at like 5 stories. So the height bonuses probably really wouldn't apply on a case asking for this much. Are there other considerations as well, like the setbacks and such?
I'll need to look into the limits for a frequent transit development option in context of this case.
Thank you. Continuing on, I think that a case can be made that this is a core transit area within a regional mixed-use center being right along South Saunders Street. I think that's important. And the table L2U calls for a maximum of 20 along frequent transit corridors. But the Dix Edge study says that zonings of up to 20 stories would be appropriate if accompanied by significant public benefit. And I don't see any public benefits offered as part of the conditions here, besides, of course, the increased tax revenue, which is a benefit. So I would hope that the applicant would be willing to consider some sort of something above and beyond what's being offered now. And I'd be happy to talk offline about what that might look like. Bike stations, I think, were mentioned in the report. Pedestrian connections, enhanced streetscapes, public use spaces, I think would all be appropriate to consider. Affordability is definitely a public benefit as well. And I think that's all I got for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Commissioner Bennett.
Commissioner Otwell stole most of my comments, so I won't be redundant. I'll just say that I wholeheartedly agree that those are the, excuse me, what I had highlighted in the staff report was the Dix Edge recommendation that increased height come with substantial public benefit. I had also noted the green stormwater infrastructure, which you said you're willing to consider. My main concern is the effect on the Fuller Heights community. It seems like it's being enveloped by this regional mixed use. And so I want to make sure that the development that is done, and I understand that the 20 stories to the south and west has already been approved, just, acknowledges that that community is there and doesn't, and is respectful of the community that is there. You noted, the applicant noted that there's a tree buffer between that community and this proposed development. It would be nice if that tree buffer could be maintained. And I think those are my comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Haver.
Thank you. I agree with all the comments to this point from all the commissioners. So the one thing that the Baker roofing to the south and the weld project, I know personally I asked to consider some adjustment to the heights adjacent to that single family. I think that's appropriate here. I believe we did that on Baker roofing. I don't think it went through on weld. I know I asked for it, but I remember feeling a little put aside when that case came back, if I recall, but it got approved. So the only thing I would consider, though, I agree again with all the comments. I think the thought of a tree buffer and not more of an urban streetscape there, if the deck is there, I think just depending on how the site develops, I think either one might be appropriate. But I think if we request that the height along that edge be reduced, I think it minimizes either way that the project goes, whether the tree buffer maintains or the streetscape is put in place. So.
Could staff review for us the existing requirements, transition requirements between this case, if it were approved at 20 stories, and the R6 neighborhood next door?
There's no transition requirement because of the right-of-way.
There's the step back requirement between 8 and 12 or something, correct? Because I know I've brought that
Right,
up
and building
before. The
massing,
applicant
yeah.
said, well, we're already required to step
That's
it back.
right.
And I'm like, I don't know that that's
Yeah, but neighborhood.
significant enough for
Right,
what my
but
concerns
neighborhood
are.
transition doesn't apply here.
Correct.
Yeah.
If I might expand on
Yes,
my
Commissioner
previous
Fox.
comment related to green stormwater infrastructure, placing it on that Fuller Street side, I think accomplishes some of the things we were just talking about. So my intent, I should have been more explicit. My intent in mentioning that was that it actually provided the public amenity for the residential development, and it provided a little bit of that space, so it provided that transition.
Yes.
For the applicant, at your neighborhood meeting or meetings, did any people from Fuller Street show up?
No.
No? Okay.
Yes. Oh, excuse me. Commissioner Lampman, I believe you had your hand up as well.
Sure, and again, I'm supportive of my fellow commissioners here and their comments. The previous case, Z7221, and the transitions there, it's pretty evident that there's that the 12-story along the residential side, so I think it makes sense to maintain a 12-story height limitation along the side that's adjacent to the neighborhood, which unfortunately encompasses the entire parcel there for the most part, but that small rectangle that's already zoned for 20 stories was because that there was already that variance from, it was already set back from the residential community itself. So if the applicant can take a look at, the boundaries of the Z7221 site map and what was approved there, I think that that's helpful for context and how we want to stay consistent with the residential community there.
And Commissioner Peeler? Did you have a follow-up? Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I capture our full list. Any other comments and questions from the commissioners? Seeing none, then to summarize, it sounds like the applicant is going to come back next time and review and potentially add conditions related to frontage conditions along South Saunders and Prospect. And a condition related to green stormwater infrastructure. A review of the public benefit, well, I'm sorry, I should have asked see if the applicant wanted to respond first to any of these issues related to public benefits or transitions to the Fuller Heights community.
No, I think we hear the feedback, certainly willing to look into it. We heard bike share, affordable housing, things of that nature from a public benefit standpoint. Happy to look at that and also come back with more information about what a height transition would look like, kind of as proposed now, and perhaps in some alternatives.
Thank you. And also potentially a tree buffer along that side as well. So
Right.
Frontage conditions along South Saunders and Prospect, green stormwater infrastructure, public benefits, and the Fuller Heights transition with a tree buffer and height limits. I believe staff is also going to come back and provide information to us about the application of the frequent transit development option on this project.
So frequent transit development option is, I can just answer that now, is limited to 5 stories max. So that's not available to them here. So none of the requirements that are invoked there, right, that would be, the way the bonus works is, if you want the bonus, you have to do these things. Well, they don't even qualify for the bonus, so there'd be no requirement for them, that regulation would really not apply to them.
I'm curious, it would not apply as currently sits with IX3?
Yes,
It would.
it could apply in that circumstance, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. But given what they're asking for, that bonus would no longer be relevant to them, or would no longer be a bonus to them.
Right, yeah. No, I just wanted to follow. I mean, my comments were regarding, like, if we were going to make anyone with 3-story mixed use do the frequent transit development option under those terms.
We can't make anybody do the frequent transit development option. That's a
Right, but
voluntary participation.
sure.
Yeah.
But the zoning is IX3, so if you want to get 5 with our option, that would be
Yeah.
the terms you would have to follow. I'm just explaining where my comments
I
are.
see. Yeah. Remember, there's no ground floor residential in IX3.
But the FTDO still applies to IX3, right?
I just am pointing out to you that housing supply is limited in IX3. Yeah.
Thank you. And at 20 stories, the, at least a lot, based on the Dix Edge study, the significant public benefit perhaps is something, is the way to get to that. And we can review the parameters of that that's offered at that next meeting as well, if that sounds like the right avenue that the commissioners are comfortable with. Okay, any other questions or comments? Anything I left off the list? Then with that, without objection, I will hold that at the table. Our next meeting is December 12th. In order to consider those revised conditions, they'll need to be in by this Friday, December 1st. Is that enough time for the applicant? Yes? Okay, then yes, Commissioner O'Haver?
Sorry. I don't want to open a can of worms here, but we're talking about significant public benefit. The applicant has followed the requirements for notifications of the neighborhood. No one showed up. Previously, we've just asked applicants if they'd be willing to, since we are holding it at the table, make a little bit more of an effort to reach out to that community, and not suggesting that that has to occur, but since we are talking about public benefit and it is adjacent to a single-family development, I would think they would probably be interested in what that public benefit might be. So just throwing that out there for consideration.
Is there any more specific notice or engagement with the community you'd like to see?
No, I'm just pointing out that we have asked for that previously, and we are talking about significant public benefit. So not requiring or asking anything of the applicant at this point.
Would the applicant like to respond to that? Okay. Well noted. Any other comments from the commissioners? Then without objection, I will hold this item to the table, at the table until our December 12th meeting to allow the applicant time to review and make some of those changes. Thank you. Moving on to our next case, item D4, rezoning case Z4423 at Lewisburg Road and James Road. This case is to rezone approximately 0.92 acres from office mixed use 3CU to neighborhood mixed use 3CU. I will now turn to Hannah Reckow for a presentation from city planning staff.
Good morning. So this is, again, Z4423 at the corner of Lewisburg Road and James Road, a little under an acre in size, requesting NX3CU. So the zoning in this area along Lewisburg Road, particularly the southern side, is primarily mixed use, and then there are some larger residential areas to the north and south. This is off of Lewisburg Road, shortly after the split with Capitol Boulevard. A good amount of commercial uses in this area, and then lower scale residential surrounding. So zooming into the site, it is 2 parcels. It's got a frontage on both Lewisburg Road and James Road. The parcels to the south are residential, and then to the west there are commercial uses, including like a law firm and beauty salon. Here's some views of the site from both roads. There are 3 proposed zoning conditions. One would limit residential uses to no more than 10 dwelling units. Another would prohibit some uses normally allowed in NX. And then the third would require, in the required neighborhood transition, which would apply along the southern property, that the developer choose a type 2 protective yard, which is the 20-foot width yard. Normally they would also have the option of a shorter 10-foot type 1 yard. So the shift here, there's a shift in uses permitted in each, and an expansion of office and retail use. Some commercial uses are limited in OX to be sort of more accessory to office use. And there are some conditions currently on the site that limit development. So removal of those would expand entitlement across the board. So this area has a higher walk score than average, probably because of the proximity of residential and commercial uses in the area, but an average transit score, proximity to jobs and transportation cost. Not a lot of bike infrastructure in this area, though. There is bus service, Route 23L, along Lewisburg Road. Goes up North New Hope Road. So with the proposed conditions, there would really be no impact on housing supply, no guaranteed subsidized units here, but the request does permit a variety of housing types and smaller lots than average, and is within walking distance of a transit route. And then the site is in a census tract that has a higher proportion of residents who are racial minorities or low income or are linguistically isolated than the city average. And the median rent in this area has increased, but at a significantly slower rate than the city average overall. The site is designated the future land use map for neighborhood mixed use, and so the requested district is consistent with that recommendation. Lewisburg Road does have a parkway corridor designation on the urban form map, and so that would recommend a kind of heavily landscaped frontage. One way to do that is to apply the parkway frontage in the UDO. The request doesn't have that frontage or any conditions to that effect, so it is inconsistent with that designation. But consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. That includes policies you see here, including reinforcing the urban pattern, and would continue to allow a mix of uses, complementary mix of uses. And then the inconsistent policy is frontage. While it doesn't have the frontage recommended on the urban form map, It is in line, it's very similar to the surrounding properties in that it doesn't have a zoning frontage. And then your deadline for action is in January. And that's all for the staff overview. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. We will now turn to public comment for those in favor. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. My name is Ben Kuhn. I'm with Ragsdale Liggett, 2840 Plaza Place, here on behalf of Cuenca Investing LLC and its principal, Mr. Gaffney Gunter, who, because of unresolvable scheduling conflicts, cannot be here this morning. I'm not going to add much to the staff report because I think it was fairly right on point. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan. It is consistent with the future land use map. It does provide public benefits. I would point out that here, this is adjacent to the two properties across James Street, which were the subject of a rezoning case, Z21 2017. That rezoned those two parcels to neighborhood mixed use approximately 6 years ago. The same issue arose in terms of the lack of parkway frontage on that lot as well, and it was approved without the frontage. I think primarily because of the reason Ms. Reckow outlined is that the development pattern out there does not have frontages in this area. It may be further down 401 that may pick up, but here it's not. These are relatively also shallow lots in that they're less than 200 feet in depth, and so the parkway frontage, I think, requires a 50-foot buffer at that area, so it would impinge on potential site development in the future. The purpose of the rezoning is to provide a wider breadth of retail and service uses that would be possible at this site on a neighborhood scale. And that's what the rezoning is seeking to accomplish. And we think without the parkway frontage, it would provide the best opportunity to do that. There were, I think, some suggestions of additional revisions to the conditions, and I talked to my client this morning. Staff had indicated that between the two lots, that the, that no more than 10 dwelling units are permitted, being defined as to the two subject properties by PIN number specifically. And we're willing to do that and incorporate that suggested edit to the conditions from staff. The only other one was as to condition number 2, which addressed, I think, the language used in referencing commercial parking lot and remote parking lot. And staff suggested changing that to parking facility, and we're doing that as well. So in terms of the conditions, I think we're on all fours with staff. We think the lack of the frontage is actually more consistent with the developed pattern around the area, and it would not overly impinge on potential development of what is kind of a shallow site for potential commercial retail service uses in that area. As provided, outlined by staff in actually the Z21 2017 case, this rezoning NX enables additional employment opportunities as well as new outlets for goods and services, allows a wider range of housing options and greater expansion of housing supply than the existing zoning. We think those public benefits are supportable, and we would request that you support and recommend approval of this rezoning. And of course, if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to address whatever questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in support of this project? Seeing none, we will move to those opposed. Anyone in opposition to this project will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Seeing none, we will bring it back to the table. Questions and comments from my fellow commissioners? Commissioner Bennett.
Oops. Thank you. Just have to make a comment that I'm not quite sure why the AC is blowing. I don't really have an issue with this case. I don't think. My question is, I noted the linguistically isolated population is 14%, and I wonder if notices were provided in any language other than English.
They were not. My client, Mr. Gaffney Gunter, is married to one of the persons in that linguistically isolated class, and I will tell you, if I can, get the names of all the people that were there at the neighborhood meeting. Many, if not most of them, had what I would say would be Hispanic surnames. So there was a presence there of linguistically isolated persons, and so, but no. The answer to your question is no.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
And I can get that list for
But
you.
I saw the attachment. I mean, it was attached to our notes. I'm just.
That's a good point, but you're right. It's not a requirement, and it wasn't done.
We've talked about this before. I just think there needs to be a standard. Go ahead, Bynum. I remember there was some talk about just automatically providing notices in English and Spanish. Has that been done? Yeah.
We're not there yet. We are working on it.
Okay.
I know that sounds lame, but it's much more difficult than it appears on the surface, right? So we're working through, well, if we start mailing people letters in a language other than English, how will we serve them when they call us and email us to ask questions as follow-up, right? That just sending notice with no support of that is perhaps worse than not telling people about what's going on, right?
Right.
Yeah. So working through the logistics of that, working through review of translation by more than one kind of Spanish speaker.
And not just Spanish, because it's not always Spanish.
Well, that would be the default language that we would.
Right.
What we have talked about is that every mailed notice would be in both English and Spanish, regardless of linguistically isolated population. Right.
Okay.
But we are working on it, but we're not there yet.
Perhaps we could discuss something that could be done in the interim until it's done. I'm glad to hear in this case that the applicant was connected to someone to get the word out. But in a case where that might not be, and we have an above average LEP or linguistically isolated population, what are we going to do to make sure that we are reaching the neighbors that may not speak English? Because when we hear that no one showed up to the meeting, it could be that they didn't know there was a meeting, or they received a notice in the language that they don't speak. Or I just would be interested in, I don't know what we can do from this table, but I would just be interested in maybe community engagement, council, somebody considering what we can do in the interim when we have the data, the demographic indicator showing us that these persons are out there, that we do something, or we request that the applicant do something to ensure that they are reached. Whether or not they show up is up to them, but I just want to make sure we're reaching them.
We are really close. I expect we'll roll this out in the first part of the new year.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
I just want to ask a quick follow-up question on that, and I guess would apply to any case. When we do mail notices like that, does it go to is it addressed to the property owner, as is in the deed, or is it just to resident of XYZ address?
So the UDO requires notice to owners. It also requires notice to tenants.
Okay.
And notice to owners is All our mailed notice is based on Wake County property records.
Okay.
Wake County maintains excellent property owner records. Tenant address information is weaker, and we knew that going in when we made the regulations about tenant notice. And so tenant notice sometimes is mailed, but more often because we don't have good addressing information. Of
course.
And frankly, we've had a lot of tenant letters returned, like just en masse. You know, you get like 100 letters back. It's a real waste of public resource and a disappointment. As an alternative to mailed notice for tenants, we post tenant notice for neighborhood meetings, planning commission, council.
Right. Cool. Thanks. I was curious whether those go to tenants and owners or one
Yeah,
or the other.
that's a change the council made in 2020,
Okay.
recognizing that tenants need to be notified just like owners do.
Yes, Commissioner Fox.
I wanted to go back to the question of the frontage again, if we can do that. Because that is the only inconsistency I'm noting. I will acknowledge your assertion here of the depth of the site being challenging, and then a couple of cases in proximity were also approved without the parkway frontage. I just cumulatively, if none of the parcels in this area are appropriate for that frontage, might that not be the appropriate frontage designation? Or at some point, do we hold somebody to that policy recommendation such that the development pattern changes and subsequent parcels are required to do so? It's just an observation.
And that's right. That's the way it was for these two properties. And as you go further down Lewisburg Road, I think that parkway frontage becomes more realistic. But in this area, it doesn't really fit what's there now. I agree with your point.
Are there pieces of the frontage requirement that can be distilled into conditions? Like that might be a question for staff. I know
Street trees or something like, I don't know.
perhaps
Yeah.
street trees, additional landscaping. I'm looking at people who do these things. Okay.
So I'm getting my cue there. I wanted to ask staff, what will be during ASR if there are no conditions? What will the requirements be for the streetscape? I drive this corridor quite a bit. There are a lot of pedestrians on this corridor. I was waiting for Mr. Otwell probably to bring this up. So, but since Commissioner Fox was eyeballing me, I figure I'll go ahead and jump in here. If you go on Google Earth, there's somebody walking on the sidewalk as well. They're pretty narrow. I'm totally fine without the frontage, especially since we're neighborhood mixed use and understanding the development pattern along that way. But I do think we need to, as a community, start to improve that streetscape frontage, make it feel more comfortable for pedestrians, because it is used anecdotally when I drive that corridor. So my question to staff is, with no conditions, what would the requirements be for streetscape?
Good morning. I'm Margaret Tartalo with Transportation. So it depends what type of site review it is, but for a Tier 3 site review, it would be, the frontage requirements would have to be built, usually. However, because Lewisburg Road is an NCDOT road, it would have to be coordinated with them, and this is a small section of road. But on the cross section, there is 6-foot sidewalk and a 7.5-foot bike lane. Unfortunately, the answer is to be determined. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I understand the overlap with NCDOT and sort of the city requirements. I guess what I'm not sure of then, does it make sense if we wanted to, as a commission, to recommend a condition that might not be approved when it goes to ASR through DOT?
So I'm just going to add on to what Margaret has said. So on the street plan, this is divided, designated as 6-lane divided, which corresponds to the Avenue 6 lane divided and the UDO requirements. And so I'm not sure which parts of this. She said that's a 131-foot right-of-way, which I don't know that we are looking for additional right-of-way here. Do you know that, if we are or not?
I don't believe so, but I would have to check
Right,
that.
we'd have to verify that. And then there's a 6-foot sidewalk and a 6-foot planting area behind a bike lane. That's the UDO standard, right? And so the question is, would the UDO standard be implemented, regulated? There's a 17-foot median as well. And then the tree spacing here is 40 foot on center average, which we have had success with that with DOT on 6-lane like this previously. So I think the tree planting requirement, I don't think there's a DOT conflict there. I think the question is it a significant enough site plan? Do you hit the tier to require the streetscape improvements or not, right? And I don't know that, and so your question is, would the applicant be willing to make those improvements regardless of what kind of site plan they're pursuing? I think that's your real question.
Yeah, I wanted to understand what the requirements
Yeah.
are now. So,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
It's- To be more explicit in what you're saying, if it were like a Tier 2 site plan, requiring those same improvements that are required for a Tier 3. Is that specific?
Yeah, it's not clear to me that the right-of-way improvements would be required
Okay,
for a Tier 1 or a Tier 2.
okay.
Yeah. But Margaret, would you disagree with that?
No, that's
I'm a little out of my
correct.
lane over here. Literally. Yeah. Yeah.
No, not that you're out of your lane.
While we have the transportation staff available, sorry to call you back. Do you know what the driveway spacing requirements are along the stretch and what it would look like? Would they be able to build a driveway, an entrance right onto Lewisburg Road? Would that be prohibited by the existing driveways and intersections?
So the existing driveway is, I think about 200 feet from the driveway just for the property just to the south. And the UDO requires 300 feet on a 6-lane divided avenue. Again, I think it'll depend on site review as to if that would create problems in terms of whether it would be allowed or not. But so that is a consideration. I don't think we know that yet. There is an opportunity to make the access off of James Road, which could alleviate some of those problems. But again, to be determined.
Thank you very much. And I have a question. This is kind of a general question for my fellow commissioners and staff, and anybody could answer. What are we trying to accomplish with the parkway frontage? Is it merely an aesthetic preference? Does it give us any functional improvements or improve the streetscape for pedestrians? I kind of feel like it's landscaping.
I tend to agree, and that's why I wonder why we use it in certain contexts if it's then not enforced and applied.
I too am uncomfortable disregarding that policy recommendation because that's the way the situation is now. I feel the policy is there to help guide what comes next. But I'm having trouble justifying restricting development on this site because we'd like large buffers on our roads for aesthetic purposes. So I think I'd be okay voting yes for this right now.
Right, so literally, the parkway frontage is intended to provide a heavily landscaped buffer between the roadway and adjacent development to ensure a continuous green corridor along the street right-of-way. That is literally what the code says. It's akin to the SHOD, the Special Highway Overlay District that we apply around interstate. And it, I would say, is very much an expression of Raleigh's desire for green corridors. Those are not particularly pedestrian-friendly. It is very much an aesthetic. The parkway frontage does require a 50-foot planting yard, which has been argued as an environmental benefit. I think that might be questionable. There probably are moments when it does contribute, but yeah.
The old code had a zoning district called thoroughfare district. That required a 50-foot buffer yard along the road frontage, and there was a substantial amount of property along the non-interstate highways, US 70, US 50, US 1, 401. There were pockets of thoroughfare along those roads which required it. So when they remapped, in some places they put the parkway, but in the comp plan, I think they suggested it along those corridors. So I personally think it's a remnant of the old thoroughfare district.
Tend to agree. Yeah. The other thing I would say is these parcels are about 200 feet deep. So if you're going to ask for a 50-foot planting yard, that's about 25% of the lot.
Yeah. So to be clear, I would support it as it is now. And perhaps looking at where parkway frontage is applied in the future, because I think this is going to be a consistent issue on many corridors.
Maybe it's a issue for the committee of the half.
Yes, Commissioner Lampman.
Just to inquire about Lewisburg Road in particular, has there been any attention to this particular corridor? I mean, it looks well, designed and it seems robust, but is there any sort of, plan for this particular corridor in the future where we may need to be thinking about what this parcel and then other parcels may contribute in the future?
I'll defer to transportation about any planned improvements in the Lewisburg corridor. I'm going to defer to transportation about any planned improvements in the Lewisburg corridor. I think it's it's 6 lanes. I don't think
It seems great.
seems cooked.
Yeah, yeah.
I think in the staff report, they mentioned something about a pedestrian crosswalk across and some other pedestrian improvements, but that's not on this site.
Okay. I'm relatively fine with this case.
Okay. Commissioner Haver?
No, just since the applicant mentioned the crosswalk in the staff report, I did note bus service Route 23L, which again is not directly adjacent to this parcel, but again, I can't imagine what a tier 2 site plan would be here. I don't know enough about the requirements, but I do think that we need to start improving the streetscape along this corridor because it's heavily used and it is adjacent and shows up in the staff report and the presentation adjacent to a bus route.
Thank you. Could I get some clarification from our fellow commissioners? We had discussed potentially seeing if the applicant was interested in a condition about requiring or putting in frontage requirements that would be included under a tier 3 site plan. Is that something, wasn't sure where an additional conversation was had, so I'm wondering if
I'm
there's
being a little bit hesitant and hedging because I don't want some unintended consequences that they're trying to come in and make some minor improvements and they're not commensurate. The streetscape improvements are then not commensurate with the development, which prohibits them from doing that. So I'm hedging a little bit. That's why I'm just trying to get a read from staff. I can't imagine what a tier 2 would be here. So I think I'm comfortable with just relying on the ordinance, but I'm just trying to get a read from staff on that. That's my concern.
Any comments from staff on what its tier 2 site plan, tier 2 development might be here?
I would have to look into that. I don't know that area of the code as well.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to respond to this topic?
The development proposal, there is none yet. This is, so we don't know what that would be, whether it would be tier 2 or tier 3. I think, Mr. O'Haver, you're right. It'll probably end up being a tier 3. So whatever the UDO requires in terms of that type of treatment is probably what you're going to see out there. And so I mean, if there were a tier 2 site plan submitted, or a condition that says if a tier 2 site plan is submitted, we would do what's required for a tier 3 ASR. I could discuss that with my client in terms of that. But otherwise, I think you're right, Mr. O'Haver, in terms of the tier 3 site review. I don't know exactly what those requirements are, but they're going to be addressing the frontage in some form, fashion during site review. I don't know if that really answers your question.
Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I want you to confirm this, but what I hear you saying is you're at least willing to go back, talk with your client, and do a little digging to come back and reassure us. Because again, what I don't want to do is put you and your client in a bind to create something that's not going to allow a tier 2 to happen if that's what we need, but I don't know the answer to that. So if you're willing to come back and discuss that with us, that would be amazing.
Yes, that'll be fine. We should be glad to.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Bennett?
Just a question. So would that be consistent then with the rezoning that was approved adjacent to it?
No, it would be more than. I mean, honestly, it would be more than. That's frankly.
That's my concern. We have this hodgepodge
Yeah.
of frontages.
Well, they're going to have to comply with the tier 3 site plan too. So what we would do if it were a tier 3 site plan would be consistent with that. If it were a tier 2 and that was a tier 2, then it would be inconsistent, right? So I think leaving it to the UDO would make those 2 sites consistent as to the frontage when it's ultimately developed and approved in the ASR review.
Well, then that's what I would support.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I think that's a good discussion, and I think it actually smoked it out.
Commissioner Lampman?
Just for comment on the adjacent NX rezoning that was done, it's Z2117. The zoning request did not include a frontage.
Correct.
Yes.
And I can provide some more guidance on the tier 2 site plan. Looking at the UDO, it's projects that would increase the square footage, either between 4,000 and 10,000 square feet, or between 10% and 25% increase what's on the site. And then there's a few other triggers as well. One is a certain increase of parking spaces, sort of a range of change from current conditions.
Specifically, it's meant for adaptive reuse or renovation, correct? Just in high
Yeah, it
level.
would be, in line with that, sort of a shift, but not a enormous increase.
Thank you. So any other thoughts from the commissioners? We have at least one in favor of leaving the frontage up to the UDO. Any other comments from the commissioners?
I appreciate Ms. Bennett's comment. I'll walk back my request, and I'm comfortable at this point.
I am as well, too, after just doing a quick review of, I think it's section 10.2.8, the tiered site plan requirements. I'm comfortable moving forward with it as it is.
Thank you. Commissioner Otwell?
Ready to make a motion?
Excellent.
All right, I think that the justification in the consistency statement is spot on. So in regards to Z 4423, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated November 28th, 2023, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
Thank you. A motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner O'Haver has seconded. Commissioner Lampman, did you have a follow-up comment? Just seconding? I see. Okay. Any other comment or discussion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. And moving on to item D3. This is an update from staff, from Planning and Development staff on two new projects, the Western Bus Rapid Transit and the Southern BRT Station Area Planning. I will turn it over to Hannah for a presentation and perhaps also to Bynum.
I was just going to say, during your retreat, we heard a request to hear more about ongoing projects.
Thank you.
Here we are. Tell us when you get tired of hearing about these projects. Hannah.
All right, yeah, so this is an informational item to provide some information on two new projects that are kicking off this fall, the Western BRT and Southern BRT station area planning processes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what they have in common and then sort of what's unique about each and where we are currently and where we're going in the near term. So it's two separate projects. They're kind of happening concurrently. Both are supported by a consultant team. Both, like the other stationary planning process for the New Bern corridor, builds on the past work of the Equitable Development Around Transit guidebook. And then both projects are also supported by a community leader group and community connectors. The community leader group is a group of residents and stakeholders who are helping advise and respond to our engagement plan and kind of how we're incorporating the feedback throughout the process. And then community connectors are members of the community who are helping us with sort of on-the-ground engagement. The consultant team that's been hired is the same for both, or just about the same, led by architecture planning firm SOM, which I realize is washed out here, and then a group of sub-consultants covering transportation, market analysis, zoning and engagement, community engagement as well. So the city area for these two projects, they both start downtown. Western goes down Western Boulevard all the way to Cary, and then the southern route goes from downtown into Garner, stopping at the Walmart, and going down South Wilmington Street, I should mention. Western corridor is a longer corridor, 12 miles, connecting downtown Raleigh to downtown Cary. We're coordinating with the town of Cary during this process. And in addition to equitable development around transit, there's also the Western Corridor study, which was adopted in 2021. This is building off of. And then the Southern corridor, as I mentioned, is a little shorter, 5 miles. A few other recent plans in that area are the Southern Gateway Corridor study and the Dix Edge area study. Those overlap mainly sort of the northern part of the study area. And the project scope is very similar to each other and to the New Bern corridor process. We're really looking at connecting neighborhoods to this service and to destinations that are along the corridor. So thinking about first and last mile mobility, pedestrian connections, bike connections, connections to other ways of getting around, and then looking at housing, affordability and concerns around displacement, and seeing what recommendations we can offer there, as well as business support and stabilization along the corridor. Both Western and Southern corridors have a good number of local small businesses. And then finally, there's potential for recommendations around zoning and land use and urban design. And then the focus on effective and equitable engagement, or try to build in throughout the whole process as well. So project timeline, we're currently in the phase 1, collecting data, gearing up, and I'll talk about this in a moment, for some community engagement next month. We'll have a few more iterations where we bring back some options to the community, and then again after that, a refinement of the recommendations. And then the phase 4 is where the sort of final draft report will come back to you as the Planning Commission for review and recommendation to the City Council. So currently we are in a process of making connections with the community and getting ready for our first round of formal engagement with the community. So we've been onboarding and training our community leader group, getting them up to speed on the project and kind of the topics we'll be dealing with throughout the process, as well as reaching out to stakeholders along each corridor, so community groups, organizations that are doing work in this area, and then the consultant team has been diving into the existing conditions analysis. So this immediate next steps are to kind of present the information we have on the existing conditions to the community and get feedback, ideas from residents and businesses and other folks who travel around this corridor, especially trying to understand how people are getting around and what they know about what's working and what's not currently. And so we've got a couple strategies for this round. We're holding 2 sort of drop-in style open houses for each corridor where folks can come in and whatever time within the open house works for them and talk with staff. Well, we're also holding an online webinar, an online option for folks to connect with the project. We'll have a survey that people can fill out if they're not able to attend. And then we're also doing a pop-up event and some business canvassing to try to go to where people are along each corridor. So for the western corridor, those open houses are next Monday and Tuesday. Monday at the Dix Park All Faith Chapel and Tuesday at Powell Drive Community Center. And then we'll also be at the Method Road Community Center this Saturday in the morning, 9 to 12, with an opportunity to meet the project team and get connected. And then events for the southern corridor are next Wednesday and Thursday at Chavis Community Center and Peach Road Park. And then we'll also be out at International Foods at the Plaza down on Chapanoke Road Saturday afternoon with a similar opportunity to meet the project. And then the open online options will be the following week, one for each corridor. And then let's see. Yeah, and that's kind of the summary of where we are. As I mentioned, we can obviously provide more information later on in the process, but ultimately these reports would be coming back to the Planning Commission for review, similar to the newborn burn process. So happy to answer any questions you have at this point.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Lampman.
Are any of the presentations, it seems to be more just kind of fact-finding, having discussions. Is there any recommendation being provided at any of these sessions?
Not in this round. This is purely trying to understand, how are people using this corridor, and it's fact-finding at this point, yeah.
Perfect. And I know I've done it a little bit fairly recently too. I just want to commend the city on how much work you all are doing in terms of educating and providing these levels of communication. It's really great to see, and it's been a true evolution since I joined the commission in 2019, that there is just a lot going on and a lot of communication, and that's really wonderful. Just to ask a high-level planning or a question is, for the Newbern BRT area, was there this similar level of communication as well? I wonder if it might be helpful just for educational purposes for the community to have a list of all the engagements such as this, where, this is our fact finding, this is what we did, and because I think it's really wonderful.
Yeah, so that information is summarized in the project report for the Newbern Station Area Plan. And then we also have recently provided a summary of that same information, not just for Newbern, but for a variety of BRT efforts to council. And we'll be providing that to them again this week. And we are working on a consolidated online listing, because that seems to be like people really seem very interested in that. I think because they don't remember they don't remember what has happened. And so that timeline reminder, I think, is really of interest to folks.
I'd like to follow up and commend staff. And I think the last two conversations we've had about New Bern, Ira has gone through and mentioned all of these, but that's somehow not absorbed by the public. But my question is, especially, it's not really a question, I'm just trying to think through this, and maybe Commissioners Otwell's GIS prowess might help on this. The Western Corridor does seem to be dealing with a lot of adjacencies to single-family residences. So I know we're putting a lot of opportunity out there, but what we've heard from some of the New Bern residences, they weren't engaged, they didn't know, so on and so forth. Now, obviously, the city has tried to bend over backwards to get that information out. I'm just wondering if there's any lessons learned or maybe some things without creating additional unnecessary work for staff, that there might be a way to adjust the way we're getting the information out so that we're not swimming upstream like we are on some of the other corridors where we're hearing there was no community engagement, I didn't know about it, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know the answer to that, just kind of processing verbally.
Can I make a comment? This is why I made the recommendation we go back to times of yore when we had these updates throughout the process. It's to do that.
Yeah, it's a friendly reminder.
Mission accomplished.
Commissioner Bennett?
I'll also commend staff, and a lot of work has been done and is being done, period, full stop. However, I can't, speaking on behalf of the community, I'm not comfortable criticizing people who, by saying they feel that they weren't engaged when they actually were, or they're not processing the amount of engagements that were held, because they do. Having spoken to quite a few people along the New Bern corridor, it's not the amount of engagement that was done. It's the method of engagement that is done. It's how people are engaged. It's the existing residents and business owners along the corridor being engaged. I will say a lot of lessons have been learned, and techniques are being adapted to reach people where they are, but holding 25 workshops along a corridor does not guarantee that you engage the people who live along the corridor. So it's not, while on the one hand I commend the city for holding the engagements, I'm not then going to criticize the community for saying I wasn't engaged, because if you didn't reach the elderly people who live along the corridor, or if you didn't reach the linguistically isolated people who live along the corridor, or the disabled people who live along the corridor, or the people experiencing homelessness who are along the corridor, then they weren't engaged. And it's not fair to say that they're wrong when they say they weren't engaged or they didn't understand the amount of engagements that were held. Engagement is ever evolving. It's never one size fits all. And you can't just rest on your laurels of saying, we had this many engagements. 1,000 people filled out the survey, because the survey was issued to the entire city of Raleigh, not just to people who live along the corridor. So unless you have an understanding of the people along the corridor who have been engaged and who have provided feedback, it's not enough to just say, we did this. It's great that we did that, but we also need metrics to show that we are reaching the people who live and work and own businesses along the corridor, because those are the people that we're getting the criticisms from. Those are the people who are saying they're concerned and worried about being displaced. A lot of the people that we're hearing from who are excited about the engagement and excited about the project aren't the people living there now, or the people working there now, or the people riding the bus there now. So we need to make sure we're having these engagements, but we also need to make sure we're engaging everybody along the corridor and not just the city.
So if I could follow up, my intention was not to criticize the neighbors. My intention was to point out to staff that that's what we're hearing and where there's some lessons learned. So I apologize to anybody in the public that felt that I was criticizing
My
them.
comment wasn't directed
Okay,
to you.
I'm saying that maybe there's some lessons learned from staffing.
Perhaps I might add an enhancement since the Newbern stationary planning process was including someone focused on equity on the consultant team for Western and Southern.
Perhaps.
Full disclosure, that person is sitting next to me.
I will also say too, just not to belabor this, but I think the community leaders and the community connectors program that the city is doing is great, because in my experience, what I have found is people tend to engage more when they're engaging with people that they know and that they trust and who live with them and work with them and are right there in the community. So I'm excited to see what type of engagement occurs with the community connectors and the community leaders, because I think we might get more and better information than we would from if it were just the city going out there to get the information. So my comments are in no way to criticize any of the work the city has done. The city has done a tremendous amount of work and spent hours and hours along these corridors. I just want to make sure that we are also acknowledging that everybody's comment is relevant. So whether we agree with it or not, it's still relevant. So if people say they aren't engaged, then let's just dig and try to understand why they feel they're not engaged, and maybe we can address these two corridors in a way that people don't feel that way.
Thank you. Commissioner Paler.
Being newer to the commission, I'm still, I guess, not totally 100% clear on what door-to-door engagement looks like for the BRT corridors. And I know Ira mentioned it once that they did do door-to-door canvassing. But I'm just curious if that does happen, if there's house-to-house phoning. Just I know mailers go out because we just talked about that. But if there is canvassing, what that looks like, I'd love to know more about that.
We have had very negative response to door-to-door. So we did door hangers for Dick's Edge area study. People were not happy to have us on their property. They were not happy to have us near their front doors. They did not want to talk to us. We have had very good luck with yard signs. People are more responsive to that. Lots of people see those. But generally, we are not attempting door-to-door, given the number of households and the number of bodies that we have to achieve, like to work on engagement from a staffing perspective. I don't think door-to-door is particularly practical, and it is definitely, people are not happy to, I mean, I'm never happy when I have a guy with a clipboard on my front porch. I don't think
do that for a living. So
yeah, I know you do, but that is not.
People don't like it, but it is really important, and it's sometimes it's
Yeah.
the only way to reach people. I'll just say that.
Yeah, so we tend to focus on things that have been more effective for us. So we got great response to yard signs. Like, so many people would show up at events and they would say, I saw this on a yard sign. And we got really strong phone call and email response to those. So that's one that we will carry forward. We have done some door-to-door via the connectors, and I think that goes better because they're mostly talking to people they know. Yeah. But when I show up at your house and you're like, who are you? We have not had a positive response to that.
I believe you do door-to-door for small businesses, though, correct? Is that
Yes,
right? Is that
we
correct?
do in-person canvassing for businesses, and that tends to go a little bit better. Those typically businesses we have really struggled to get people on the phone. So phone calls to businesses are not particularly effective, but the door-to-door has been more effective. It really kind of depends on who we're trying to reach, right? Yeah.
But just to be clear, for the southern and western corridors and Newbern corridor, there was not door-to-door knocking or hangers done.
Well, Western and Southern are just getting going.
Okay.
So we may still do some door-to-door work there.
I guess I mean pre-rezoning for them.
No. No. And then I believe there was some neighborhood canvassing for New Bern, mostly by connectors and our partner, our P3 partner.
There was door-to-door for small businesses, and there was community connectors went door-to-door in neighborhoods.
Would it be possible to get feedback from the connectors as to their experience on, specific ones?
Yeah, we talk to them all the time.
I mean, but to us, to the commission, to be able to get, what their feedback was and their communication, kind of what their observations were in communicating with the public there.
Are you asking them to report on what they heard or their reflection on the process?
Well, from a process standpoint, they could reflect on their process. But from like New Bern, for example, the reflections on what their communication was, what they were receiving back from the community as thoughts, kind of their ability to articulate what the feedback was along the corridor from their canvassing experience.
Right. We can't deliver that tomorrow.
Sure.
I can talk with Ira and see if we can deliver that by the 12th.
Okay.
But after the 12th,
maybe
I'm not sure
somebody-
what the utility would be.
And I don't know if somebody might be able to show up and just provide commentary. This was my experience, and this is the feedback that was received.
If I'm not mistaken, it's in the engagement section of the final report.
Okay, and I was trying to look back at, what the engagement, I just couldn't find it right away, so I apologize.
Perhaps a good segue to our reports in just a moment about the report for tomorrow, although Vice Chair Raines is not here, but we can, I expect we will probably be discussing these topics tomorrow as well at our special committee of the whole meeting. Were there any other comments? Commissioner, okay.
Well, and just to comment on the portal results, what I see here is just a tally. Maybe I'm not seeing, I get that some of this information is here, but even as I'm doing active searches for meeting dates, I don't see it. And maybe I'm not looking in the right things, but I don't see it.
Tallies?
I see a tally of engagement. So rezoning engagement portal results. There were 1,100 views, 55 participants, 72 responses, and 122 comments. But I don't see the response package. And maybe I'm not looking correctly.
I believe I have seen it in the past. I'm not sure which agenda it was on, but we can certainly take
I
those into
think it's
account.
summarized in the station area planning report as well. And it's on the agenda. I think in the memo on the agenda, it's summarized right at the beginning, I believe. Yeah.
Any other topics on the western and southern corridor? And not seeing none, I would like to thank staff for their work on this project. And we look forward to seeing what's next. Moving on to the approval of the minutes from the November 14th meeting. Any comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Bennett?
I just had one. On page 4 for Z4523, it says the vote was unanimous, and then it says 4-3. So it was actually 4-3, but not unanimous. You got it, okay. That was the only thing I saw.
Yes. One other agenda item on the final page, G1, the report from the chair. Just the final sentence was talking about the new committee. And it says the members are as follows, and it lists 4 members. I would also like to add a 5th member, Commissioner Mann. Thank you. As the 5th member. Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Excuse me. Thank you. Moving on to report of, on to other business. First, the report of the chair. Our next regular Planning Commission meeting is December 12th. There will not be a second regular meeting in December. So we will resume in January with 2 regular meetings in January, but again, we will only have 1 regular meeting in December. Moving on next to report of our vice chair. I will cover that report. Our last meeting, regular meeting for the Committee of the Whole in November, we did not achieve a quorum, so that item will need to be held at the table. There is no regular meeting in December. There's one place where there is a regular Committee of the Whole meeting listed on December 28th, but that is in error. That is not correct. There will be no Committee of the Whole regular meeting in December. So that one item on the agenda in November will be heard at our regular Committee of the Whole meeting in January. No?
The item that you did not discuss during regular CAL this month is published on the special CAL tomorrow on consent, so that you could report it. You could report it to January, refer it to January for discussion. You could also go ahead and defer it to the 12th, to your regular meeting for discussion. It's really up to you. We wanted to give you and that opportunity to hear that before January if you wanted to do so. Not expecting that it would be discussed tomorrow by any means, but just trying to give you some options for how you dispatch that item.
Thank you. And it looks like we have, I'm trying to, looking at the agenda, we have 4 cases on December 12th, so there probably would be room on the agenda to add this item. Without objection, I would like to tomorrow propose that we move that item from our November Committee of the Whole meeting to our regular Planning Commission meeting on December 12th. Any discussion on that topic? Nope. Okay, well, that covers that item, so we will cover that tomorrow. Speaking of that, we will have a special Committee of the Whole meeting tomorrow to cover the New Bern Area Station, BRT Station Plan and related rezoning cases. This will be the final time that we can hear that item in the, at the Committee of the Whole. The deadline for action on that item is December 12th. So we must vote it out of the Committee of the Whole tomorrow to the full Planning Commission. Just by show of hands for a quorum purposes, how many people here plan to attend tomorrow? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6. And yes. Okay, we have a quorum. That's great news. So that meeting again is tomorrow at 4 o'clock in these chambers. And we have asked that folks be available to attend until 7 o'clock instead of our regular 6 o'clock time. So we will see you tomorrow for that item. And that is all I have about Committee of the Whole. So going down the line, Commissioner Otwell.
I'll just make one quick comment that tomorrow I'm available to be here until we lose quorum and finish up the topic. So 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever it takes.
Thank you.
Infrastructure and mobility, or whatever it will evolve to, is not meeting in December. And I'm also available to be here until we're done.
Text Change Committee is not meeting in December. In theory, in some point in the future, we will have items on the agenda and we'll meet again.
Thank you.
No report.
Thank you.
I will be absent on that December 12 meeting. So if I need to email that to make that official, I don't know if this
Thank you.
creates that. And then as far as the cow, and maybe this is conversation, I know there was some previous conversation before the last one about the process. My sense is, and I don't know, we may have a lot more folks show up, and I think there was a sort of a thought put forward in the last meeting that so that we're not here till midnight, which if we need to be, then we'll do what we need to do. But are there certain cases that we as a commission feel comfortable enough to bundle together to say, remove these, keep them, or whatever the issue might be, because otherwise we're going to be going through every single case individually. And there was a lot of discussion up here. Understandably, all of the folks from the community that came here to speak wanted their voice to be heard, and we allowed that. I don't know if there's a procedural way that we can do both. And we started to kick that idea around at the last meeting, but then time was running out. We only had 2 hours. We wanted to make sure we heard from the public. So I don't know if that's better conversation offline, if that's something we want to do while we're here. I don't know what other commissioners' thoughts are on that.
Vice Chair Raines might have he'll be chairing the meeting tomorrow, so he might already have an outline for the new process on how to manage and get through the agenda tomorrow. I don't know. But I'm sure he would be very interested in your feedback and thoughts on that if you want to reach out to him. If there's anything, I know last time we had to get through some of the bigger questions about new changes to heights generally and things like that took quite a bit of time. Once we actually got to the cases themselves, they started going a little bit more efficiently. I would suspect we're going to focus on getting through the cases, or by the cases I mean the citizen request to change the cases tomorrow, but I don't know the specific order that he has planned at this time.
I'll just make a comment that I think what we experienced was an overview of how we were going to tackle it, and then I think the comment was made that we do have to go one by one, and I think that was, in fact, valuable for me as well, who also wanted to bucket the items. But as we were discussing each one, I think there were unique situations to each one that did deserve its attention. If we can just go through them and buckle down and knock them out one at a time and just get through it, I think that would be advisable.
Does anybody know how many we have left, individual cases?
I don't. I would tend to support Commissioner Lampman's view, though, of taking them, I mean, if one by one, I think it took some time to come up with the criteria to tackle them as well, but there will, each one is a case-by-case basis, I think, that they could have special circumstances.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not suggesting we don't take them case by case. I'm just saying that if someone from the public is here to speak and we've agreed that criteria, we need to go one by one. If there's a question here, we ask the applicant to come forward. Yeah. Again, I don't want to not hear from the public, but we've got to find a way to be efficient. We've got one meeting left. Mm-hmm. So I don't know the answer, but.
Yeah, I think just buckling down, just tackling it, people coming up at that time, just tackle it.
Commissioner Bennett?
One of the things that threw me at the last meeting was that some of the commissioners had talked ahead of time and had developed revised criteria, and not all of us were privy to that criteria, so it slowed us down some while some of us were trying to absorb the revised criteria. If we are proceeding with that revised criteria, I think it would be helpful for all of us to know ahead of time as well as the public, because what we're looking at is what's been published in the agenda with the city criteria for why items were included or not. If we as a commission have agreed to revise those, which it seemed like we did at the last one, then I think it's important that be what's showing on the screen and not the old criteria that we're no longer using, because that might change someone's comments to us if we're looking at different criteria.
Well taken. To that point, I know there was, I know I led the effort on that. That was, again, that was because I was originally supposed to chair that meeting, and I was trying to figure out, or well, not that meeting, but an earlier one where we ended up not having quorum because Commissioner Raines was unavailable. And I had been working on an outline with him to come up with how we could manage that meeting efficiently. And then once we decided that we realized we didn't have a quorum and I wouldn't be chairing anymore, I kind of dropped that effort and wanted to hand it back to him to lead that effort. But perhaps for tomorrow, it might be helpful to, if he or I might capture some of that on a one-pager that could be circulated or published or held up. I will say the point of the criteria was to figure out how we could efficiently manage the cases on a sort of consistently. But at the same time, as we go through the individual cases, we can identify where some of the criteria might be flawed a bit and need to be changed or improved, or how it might deal with situations we just hadn't contemplated earlier. And so it, was kind of just more of a general guidance on how to think about some of these things as opposed to a strict judicial test where we then sort of strictly apply it in each case. So that's my only hesitancy in putting up a list of new criteria, that if we go through the cases and see why one of them might be flawed or need some exceptions or something like that, it might not leave that room to accomplish some of that. So, yes, and again, those criteria we're trying to summarize what we had heard previously were the concerns, such as who owns the parcel, who is making the request. Is it the individual owner, or is it someone who doesn't own the property? It's just some of the things we had discussed previously was more just trying to get some of that organized into one place so we could think about each of them as we went through, as opposed to unilaterally coming up with that, just sort of summarizing everything that we had heard previously up to that point. Not sure where that exactly leaves things for tomorrow. Maybe lots of phone calls on a non-quorum basis between each other this afternoon.
Yeah, I must have been more confused than I thought I was at the last cow after that discussion. So I do think, seemed like we got into a flow. I didn't take it as we created new criteria, but perhaps we did. Maybe I missed that part, but it did seem like we got in a flow. So maybe there's some conversations collected. Well, however we need to do it, one or two people or phone calls so that there's not a quorum. But to sort of revisit kind of that groove that we gotten into so that we can hit the ground running, because, and I'll get up to speed, maybe everybody else is comfortable with kind of where we landed last time, but I think I'm a little more confused now than I was at the last meeting, but.
Any other comments on report? It sounds like we need to all have some phone calls this afternoon. Commissioner Lampman? Oh, any other report of the members today?
No report. I'm available tomorrow. Same, for as much time as we need to finish that project.
Thank you.
No report, and I'm unavailable tomorrow.
Thank you. Okay, and then with that, this meeting is adjourned. Oh, excuse me. No, it's not. Opening it back up. Excuse me. I have had like a little bit of a migraine.
That was the quickest
all day,
meeting
so
I ever had.
I'm a little bit off my game. I'm fighting a little migraine. Yes, Bynum, today.
Yeah, sure. The only thing I wanted to emphasize, we're only meeting once in December. That's for your regularly scheduled meeting on the 12th. It's the holidays. Two, I'm still looking for one of you to volunteer to be the liaison to SMAC, which is the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission. Is that you, Mr. Otwell? Thank you so much. I can now take that out of my report. And then I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you tomorrow who have said you can be here. Thank you so much. Even though I feel like we already just had half the meeting. So thanks.
Thank you. With any other comments from anyone for the good of the order? Okay, with that, now the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.